Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of Reimagining Your Business. Over the past, I would say, month now, we've been covering many topics with Amir Qureshi. And the first one really began with how do you keep your business afloat during these critical times? The second episode really dove into re-engineering your business and how can you shift the way you're doing business, but keeping the core still very much alive. And the third episode really touched on building a high performing culture. Now, when we talk about building a high performing culture, we have to ensure that we have the team that fits right in. So, in today's episode, we're going to be inviting Amir back to really dive deeper into how do you form effective teams. So, when we talk about effectiveness, I like to talk in degrees of effectiveness, not so much good, bad, what have you. But if you have an effective team that can drive change forward, there's nothing better to it. So how do we go about doing that? I think is absolutely critical. So I'm going to now admit Amir back into the room. Amir, welcome.
Hello, Imad.
It's good
How
to
are
have
you?
you. I'm well, alhamdulillah. Good to see you again. I know we've been on a bit of a
Yes,
hiatus,
thank
if you will, but I'm so glad that we're back and just want to dive deeper into forming our business. I know that we've spoken significantly about many other topics in terms of these critical times and what we must be doing, but we're now getting to the stage where, you know, in the previous episode, we really talked about building a high performing culture. And to build that, in essence, we need to ensure that we have the right team that can take us forward in it. So today's topic, yes, as you are well aware, we are talking about forming an effective team. And as I expressed earlier in the opening, really effectiveness is, I like to talk in degrees of effectiveness. And I think it's important that we sort of dive into that because it's not about good or bad. If something doesn't work, it doesn't work. So how do we go about re-engineering that to an extent? Without
Yes.
further ado, let me ask you first, how are you? How have you been? And what's the latest in your end of the world?
Well, there's a lot happening here in Australia. Thankfully, from the COVID point of view, things, at least in our neighborhood, are relatively under control. But in the state of Victoria, we have a few challenges. The numbers are quite high. They're getting about 400-500 cases a day, which is very high for Australia. Obviously,
Wow.
not as high as some of the other countries, but that's caused some concern amongst the community. But otherwise, businesses are starting to reopen in some parts of Australia. In fact, even though Australia is one country, it's made up of several states and territories, and some states are almost getting back to business as normal, while others are still dealing with the pandemic. So we have a bit of a stop-start situation. So that's keeping me entertained, very busy with work and lots of other things happening. But it's good to be here with you again to talk about this very interesting topic of effective teams.
And I know you have a lot to share about it, but when you think about the pandemic, I think we all started as a global community. We all started sort of at the same level. And now we can see the effectiveness of some countries that are fighting or winning against the COVID battle, and some countries are struggling to do so. So there's, I think, a lot of points that perhaps you're going to share
Yes.
from a business lens that might be apt for sort of a national lens as well. So hopefully that people can consider. So getting right into it, because we are, of course, limited on time. Uh, the first question that I want
Sure.
to sort of ask you is really around why is it important to, first of all, let's just talk about building effective teams or building a good team or forming a good team. How do you go about doing that?
Well, this is a topic that I've spent a lot of time researching. I've delivered a lot of training programs in the area of team building, etc. Once again, a bit unusual for an accountant, but I love this whole idea of building an effective team. And we narrowed it down to about 4 steps in terms of building a team. And of course, there's many other variations to this theme, but essentially, I break it down into 4 simple steps in terms of building an effective team. The first one is attract. You've got to get the right people onto the team, and we'll talk about that in more detail. Second one is the engagement. third step is coaching, and the fourth one is reward. So attract, engage, coach, and reward. These are the four steps I've sort of summarized in terms of building an effective team. And we can dive into that in more detail if you like.
That there's a lot of, I can imagine a lot of content that's going to be driven around that. So when you talk about attract, I think that's the first one that we have to allude to. So when it comes to attracting, we as individuals who are running businesses want to attract the best people possible. How do we go about building the best people or attracting the best people possible? And how, that's pretty much the question. How do you go about attracting the right people?
And so I suppose the first thing then, as you just said, it's about the right people. So as Jim Collins very famously said in his Good to Great book, getting the right people on the bus. So we need to then, first of all, define what qualities and attributes we want in our team members. People that are going to be part of this family, if you can call it that, or the team. What are the skills? What are the attributes? What are the characteristics that we want? So as the leader of the team, it's your responsibility, firstly, to think about these things and, develop some guidelines, some ideas, and then that becomes your starting point in terms of attracting the right people. Mm-hmm. And all of the stuff that I have read about this suggests that unless people meet the attributes, the qualities, the characteristics of being a good team member that you've specified for yourself, then don't have them on the team. In other words, do not recruit them even if you have a need for a position or something unless they get through the first set of attributes and characteristics that you want in team members.
So how would you break that down for me a little bit? Because when we're looking at attracting the people with the right skill sets, right? There's a strong component when it comes to personality types as well. And it's often said that, you've got to get the right skill sets, you've got to get the right personality types, because if you've got people with strong skill sets, sometimes there's a lot of overlap, right? And one person is doing many tasks and then they think that they're expert in most of it. And when we're hiring people, we're usually hiring people who are specialized to an extent in certain skill sets. So do we have to segregate the specialization versus the personality? How does that work?
Yes. So this is often the challenge we face. So we may be looking for a particular set of skills or a technical skill, and that often becomes the number one criteria upon which we recruit. But if that person, despite the technical skills, doesn't have the characteristics and attributes we want, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, then he's going to be a misfit or she's going to be a misfit, and the working and the dynamics of team will not work effectively. So we need to identify what are the sort of qualities we are looking for. So these are personal characteristics and attributes in people that we look for. And it could be anything, and every team is going to be different. The leader has to define the attributes, but it could be that, integrity is very important. We want people who like to work together as a team. We want people who will have each other's back in case and at times of difficulty. So we need to define all of these qualities in our team members. And most people agree on the fact that if someone doesn't have those characteristics or attributes, then you should not hire them.
Interesting. That's very true, I think, in my world as well. And I think we're on the same page on that. Something that's always been bothering me, well, I wouldn't say bothering me, but it's always been up there for conversation, is the cost that one spends on hiring someone. Now, we know there's a quote out there that says that if you pay for peanuts, you will get monkeys. And
if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. That's what it says. Yes.
So the question then lies is, how important is it that people must invest if they're looking to consciously create quality in a limited amount of time? Because in today's day and age, I think deadlines are becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, and the quality or the need for quality is growing ever so high. So to invest in something means that you're going to have to put something behind it. We've talked about cash flows and everything else in the previous episode. So how important is that when it comes to hiring the right people? And what was one consider perhaps?
Well, that's a great question, because ultimately, sometimes in your enthusiasm and the speed for recruitment, you may actually not be able to pick certain issues with a person's personality and so on. And, hiring the wrong person ends up costing you a lot. It costs you in terms of lost opportunities. Your reputation in the market gets affected if you let the person go after 2 or 3 months. Similarly, obviously, you mess up someone's career if they are a wrong fit. So it's very important for lots of reasons, including financial ones, and not to compromise on the dynamics of your team, not to get the wrong person. So there's a whole series of things that you can do to make sure that you have the right person to start with. And first thing we talked about was understanding and being aware of the qualities and attributes that you want. Now, it's very difficult then to assess those things in an interview situation. So a lot of companies have decided or resorted to things like psychometric tests, personality profilings. Some of the larger companies have, in-house psychologists who will do testing to make sure you would fit into the culture of the organization. There is a lot of companies that will put you through series of interviews with the team members that you'll be working with and so on. So you need to devise basically a recruitment strategy depending on the size of your organization, the type of business you're in, that will help you to minimize the chances of making a wrong hiring choice. And you need to invest time upfront because otherwise it will cost you a lot more subsequently.
That's true. Initial investment will yield greater results in the long term. Indeed.
Yes.
So the first part you talked about was the attraction side. What's the second step?
Yes. Well, once you've got the people, I suppose you need to make sure that you engage with them. And with engagement, we're talking about everything from how you motivate them, how you mentor them, and so on. And then we'll move on and talk about coaching as well. But just one point in terms of recruitment of the team that I forgot to mention is that diversity is also extremely important in a team. And this is an important point. Diversity in terms of gender, making sure that, we haven't got, as we like to say in Australia, all blokes and on the team. We want the gender balance. We want a cultural balance. In Australia, we have a lot of multicultural teams. That helps, and it actually helps in the performance of the team. And we want different generations in the team because that provides us different perspective. Your perspective and my perspective may agree on certain things, but you have a different way of looking at life because of where you're coming from in terms of your generation and so on. So all of these things help to build a stronger, better, more effective team. So we cannot overlook that fact. So that I just wanted to mention that. So we were talking about engagement as our second step. And when we talk about engagement, basically you've got to get people committed and motivated to perform. And that's not going to happen by just reading them the rule book or the company vision statement. You've got to engage with them at an emotional level. They have to want to work for you if you're the team leader. They have to invest, because at the end of the day, as Peter Drucker once said, good people or good employees are like volunteers. They can pretty much go anywhere. And those are the people that you want in your organization. So you need to invest time in building relationships and so that they want to actually work for you and they want to help you develop something worthwhile.
Right. So emotional intelligence is a huge part. And I know you're going to touch on this perhaps in the coaching segment. When we look at emotional intelligence and you take on the role as a leader or a manager that is ensuring that the betterment of the team, how do you ensure that you're working with not only just skill sets, but personalities as well, but really driving behaviors, if you will, to ensure that everybody stays together? How do you create that unified team?
So one of the things is that a good team has to have a set of rules, similarly roles and responsibilities. So rules, roles, responsibilities. So everyone should know what's expected of them. And over the last few nights, I've been totally mesmerized by a documentary I've been watching about the Australian cricket team. Now, anyone who knows about cricket knows that Australia has had one of the highest performing teams for generations, right? And then there was an incident in South Africa when the Australian team was caught out, cheating effectively with the sandpaper and trying to get unfair advantage. Now that whole episode is probably the biggest thing that's happened in the Australian sporting industry for generations. So what happened was, and it's a documentary, you can watch it on Amazon Prime. What happened was that the team and the people were obviously banned for a while, etc. But the team hit rock bottom. And I think the first tournament they played after that episode with new team members, a new captain and a new coach, they lost, I think 5-0 to England. From that point, so this documentary traces how the team went about rebuilding to the point that they got to the semifinals of the World Cup last year. They also managed to win the Ashes in England. And the whole thing was based around building the team from ground up. And the coach goes about firstly talking about the values of the team and how the team will support each other. It's a wonderful case study in how to build a team that's really struggling to one that effectively gets to the top of the world rankings. And watching it, and we talk about all of this stuff, but watching it, and they have amazing footage from inside the team meetings, from the changing rooms, the dressing rooms, and so on. And you see the highs and the lows and the sort of speeches that the coach makes or the captain makes after, sometimes when they win, sometimes when they lose. And it's just fascinating how, but a lot of it is based around building the right culture that we've spoken about, having a set of values that you're aspiring towards. Also agreeing and making sure that the way we behave. So for example, one of the no-nos for the Australian teams was that Australia has always had a very aggressive approach to playing cricket. Sometimes the Australian team was considered to let's say, go over whatever the agreed limits are. I don't know what the limit is, but there are certain things that you can do and certain things you don't do. So one of the things they decided to do was not to overstep the mark. Now, they had agreed between themselves what the mark was, and the coach repeatedly says in this documentary, it's okay to have banter. It's okay to, be competitive, but it is not okay to abuse the other person. So they had these limits, and throughout that 18-month period that this documentary covers, most of the players, in fact, I don't think anyone oversteps the mark. But the rules had to be defined, they had to be agreed, and they had to be monitored. And obviously with the team sport like cricket, where everything is being recorded and watched by millions, if you break the rules, if you go outside the agreed principles, then it's very, very obvious. And then there are consequences, right? You will be dropped for the next match, or you may actually get fined or whatever.
That's so long as people follow through with consequences. I believe a lot of people like to give the consequences but never follow through with it, and I completely appreciate that point. And I loved how you talked about roles and responsibilities, and another word for that I use is accountability. When you give people, it's almost a blame game. You give credit where it's due, but you take the blame as the leader in terms of the overall team construct. And when we think about ensuring that we put processes in place that allow team members, individuals to take on roles, adhere to those roles, and be accountable for their failures, their wins, whatever it may be, the whole team then collectively can move forward quite nicely, I would say, because there's not really a blame culture. You're not singling some single individual out. And what I find is that when you don't single a single person out, instead of looking at the person, act on the behavior. And it's the behavior that can be judged and then action taken upon. And I believe that it
absolutely
empowers people where they then, in an effect, don't wish to drop the ball in whatever task or activity that they're they're doing. So I think that's very, very important. So thank you for sharing that.
Yes. Yes, sure.
So now that we've talked about attracting the right people, you talked about engaging the right people. And if anybody hasn't seen the third episode, which is building a high performing culture, I think there's a lot of insight
Yes.
in there as well. So you can definitely go back and watch it. The third piece you talked about is coaching.
Yes.
So would you like to dive deeper
So
into that?
ultimately, the role of the team leader or the manager of the team is not too different from being a coach of the cricket team that we were just talking about. You have to help get the best out of the team members that you have. Now, if you've chosen the team like you do in a cricket match or a hockey match or something, then of course you have that added advantage of having handpicked these people, making sure they have the right skill sets. So effectively, as the person who's responsible, you have to coach, you have to guide them, you have to help them so that they deliver the best performance possible. And this is the hard thing about being a coach, because as a coach in a sporting team, once you've done all the hard work, you have to then step back and let the team perform. And if they do well, nobody thanks you. If they do badly, then everyone blames you. This is one of the problems with being a coach. But coaching and mentoring is so important in terms of building a high-performing team or effective team that as part of some research I did a while ago, the CEOs of various companies that we spoke to said they spend up to 25%, and this is CEO time we're talking about, they think they should spend up to 25% of their time coaching and mentoring their team members, their direct reports. So that's how important it is. And you really need to invest time to make sure that your team develops and grow. And when we talk about coaching, one of the very interesting models that I came across many years ago, John Maxwell, who's the leadership guru, his approach to training people and coaching and guiding them, he says it's basically made up of 5 M's. He says this: I model, I mentor, I monitor, I motivate, and I multiply. Now, the most interesting part of this one is the last one, which is I multiply, because you can't just stop at creating one excellent team member or 2, you've got to create a whole heap of them. So model, mentor, monitor, motivate, and multiply. The wonderful quotation out of his
Beautiful.
book.
No, I love that. No, so can you then give a differentiation between being a coach versus being a manager? Okay, because a lot of people who are managers or are leaders in an organization struggle with this idea of becoming a coach. So what are your thoughts? Now, been in the coaching business for 10 odd years now, and I don't want to really give my thoughts because I know I'm not going to stop. But I'd love to get your insights and get your perspective on, the importance of coaching and how relevant it will be if a manager or a leader can enhance their skills as a coach when it comes to team performance.
Yes. Well, I think this is a trick question because this is more your area than mine, but I'll just give you my perspective. So if I was talking about a typical manager, he or she is just interested in getting the job done, the task. This task could be, make widgets, as we say in the accounting terms, or, provide some customer service or whatever it is that you're doing. That's really all they're concerned about. They're not really worried about anything else. As long as the employees, let's take a call center, as long as the employee answers the phone, after 3 rings and the average time is 5 minutes or whatever KPIs have been set, the manager will be happy enough. If the person is not performing, the manager may do some counseling and that kind of thing. A coach, on the other hand, is much more interested in your overall development and well-being. And ultimately, obviously, he has to ensure that you deliver the results. But he's giving you a holistic set of guidelines. He's helping you to actually become a better person, better human being in all aspects of life, not just in terms of answering the phone and making sure that you meet the KPIs. So it's a much more holistic approach. And all the good and successful coaches say that their focus is to make better people, better human beings. Once they achieve that, everything else falls into place.
Right. Someone once asked me, what is coaching? And any question that one asks in a specific field of the individual that they're specialized in to an extent, you can write a thesis on that particular topic. So 2 words I have when it comes to the world of coaching is inspiring advancement. And that's
Yeah.
essentially it. So everyone, and I like how you put it, is every individual is unique in their own characteristic. And how do we encourage? You mentioned a point just not too long ago where you have to take a step back, and I think it's absolutely critical and important that when you as a leader take a step back, you allow the other person to perform and also allow the other person to be making mistakes, because that's where true
Yes.
growth happens. And in order for someone to take on a leadership position, not so much on a title perspective, but to assume a leadership capability in the job that they have, then they have to be comfortable knowing that it's okay to make a mistake, not repeated mistakes in sort of the same mistake repeated. However, it's okay to drop the ball sometimes. However, if we learn from it, and that's just the mindset, it's not the winning and losing, rather it's the winning and learning. So coaching is huge, and I think it's one of the most valuable tools that any organization must have as part of their organization to develop their people, because inevitably when you develop people, the organization, the teams, they all grow substantially. So that's brilliant. So now moving on to the fourth point. You'll have to remind me what that was. I didn't have a pen
Yes.
at the time.
The reward. The
Reward.
reward. Yes, that's a good one, because ultimately we talked about consequences of non-performance, which is the negative aspect.
Mhm.
So, what happens if you don't perform? And we're very quick to penalize people if things don't go to plan or if they don't deliver. But on the other side, when people do perform, when they achieve the goals you've set up for them, they meet the key performance indicators and so on, there has to be some reward. And reward for some people, and again, this comes to motivation, I suppose. For some people, just doing a good job is a reward enough, which is the intrinsic motivation. But for others, people like us, we need something else. The reward could be by way of financial reward, could be promotion, acknowledgement, whatever the reward is. Firstly, it has to be out there and agreed upon that if you achieve certain outcomes, this is what the reward is going to be. And then, as the leader, as the coach, you have to make sure that the team members actually get what you promised. There's nothing worse than promising something and then not delivering on that, because all of a sudden, you didn't see the budgets would run out. Now, all of a sudden, you don't have the money,
All about follow
or
through.
you offered them an overseas. Yeah. So you've got to follow through with what you promise, because otherwise, as the coach or as a leader, you actually lose a lot of face, you lose credibility. The next time the team members will not perform because they'll know that, whatever you were promising, you didn't deliver last time.
Yeah, if you've got more consequences than you do have rewards, then there's an imbalance. And I say that as often as you want to give consequences, you have to at the same rate give rewards as well. And I'm a big believer and enforcer on this idea where you've got to celebrate your wins, every win along the way,
Yes.
because motivation isn't just about after your performance review at the end of the year. I believe performance reviews can happen on a daily basis, and that's where sort of real managing, it's not micromanaging, completely different, but it's really celebrating all of the small things that you do to get you to where you need to be. And I think that's something that's important. So if your consequences
Yes.
outweigh your success, your rewards, then you've got something going wrong. So I would say flip the script or keep it balanced. Otherwise, it's unfair.
Yes, no, that's absolutely correct. And when we talk about reward, a lot of people immediately jump to bonuses and expensive gifts and gold watches and stuff
Right.
like that. And there is obviously a need and place for those. That being said, a lot of and you're talking about giving real-time feedback, frequent feedback to your employees. A lot of the time, it's simple things like a pat on the back, acknowledgement, a nice email, a nice text message saying you've done a wonderful job. And since, I've not worked for other people that frequently, but when I've occasionally come across a good manager or someone that I've worked with, I noticed that it's the acknowledgement that I personally appreciate the most. The way they speak to you, the way they treat you, And the ultimate thing that we talked about before as a team member that you want is that they have your back. So they'll support you in times of difficulty. If there are issues, they will stand by you. That's, I think, for me as a member of a team, that means more to me than anything else. Knowing that my team leader or the person I'm working with has my back, and he's not going to push me under the bus when the opportunity,
But
God
you're right,
forbid,
and that's
arises.
loyalty, I think, ultimately at the end of the day. And we have a number of opportunities where, you know, I've seen many organizations who have amazing people that they work with, and looking at the leaders and how they communicate and engage their teams is quite remarkable. And what I see is that despite the fact that there are opportunities elsewhere for greater money, greater reward, greater compensation, what have you, people choose not to move because it's the people that they're connected with, not so much the job. And
Yes.
if we can start to foster that within an organization, nothing like it. I think it's absolutely incredible. And you actually get more from people as opposed to, you know, subpar performance. Because there's this, you know, there's top performance and then there's average performance. And there's a massive gap in between. And you know,
Absolutely.
when it comes to hiring people, this might be coming back to your first point of attraction. When it comes to hiring people, what we often find, or what we should be finding rather, is looking for individuals who, you know, who have been in a job for 2 years or longer in the past 5 years. Um, Someone who has a great network in the business community, someone who has enthusiasm for the work that they do, someone who is vocal enough to speak. um, when you look at these characteristics and these traits, that's a great place to start. And I believe when we look at, you know, the whole idea of rewarding, there are many factors in terms of how you reward people, and everybody is very different. Some would be rewarded or benefit financial benefits, some would be recognition, what
Yeah.
have you. So you've got to identify what those are and then compensate accordingly and recognize people for the value that they bring. Because without them, then, you know, I often see organizations start to tumble when the vision of the
Yes.
organization isn't aligned with the vision of the team.
Absolutely. And you know, one of the things when we talk about things like teamwork, and previously we were talking about culture, a lot of people think, or used to think perhaps, that this was just warm, fuzzy kind of stuff, which
Right.
wasn't quantifiable, which didn't add value. And one of the more recent studies that I came across was through the MIT's Human Dynamics Laboratory. So they actually have a laboratory which observed teams from about many, many companies across America, amounting to something like 2,000 people. And the ultimate thing that came out of that study was that teamwork was essentially a science, and they could observe whether it was a good team or not by actually just basically honing in on the dynamics and how the team interacts and works together. And they narrowed it down to three things: the characteristics of high performing teams. They narrowed them down to energy, creativity, and shared commitment. And they said that these are observable, quantifiable, and measurable attributes in a team. Now that's fascinating. For years we've been talking about teams and all of that, but you know, often you said it was intangible and you couldn't really quantify or figure this out. But they, after observing more than 2,000 people, they said, no, we can actually tell from observing whether this is a good, effective team or not. So I thought that was quite quite interesting.
That's actually pretty interesting because I've come up with my own three based on the research and experience that I've had working with organizations and individuals within teams. And if I were to summarize it on myself, I
Yes.
wrote them down. Number one is to be true to the team's vision. And what that does is it drives purpose and direction. The second thing is it give people
Yeah,
the space, and
absolutely.
we've talked about this quite often, give people the space to operate and develop themselves as leaders.
Yes.
And what that actually does is it enhances their ability to deliver on the tasks that need to be delivered upon. And then the third is to
Yeah.
remain intellectually sharp as a team, as a unit. You know, organizations have
Yeah.
vision, missions, values, etc. And when I work with organizations, what I tend often to do is whatever team you may be in, however small, medium, or large it may be, I always like to help create a vision for the team. It doesn't have anything to do with if there's alignment with the organizational vision, that's great. But how does the team exist together? And I think that's incredibly important. And what that does is when the team knows what their own personal vision is and aligns that with the organizational vision as a whole, then it keeps people young, it keeps and people energetic, and it gets them excited to wake up every Monday, because everybody loves Mondays, as we all know. Gets people excited to wake up the next day to get to work. So I think those three are also quite
No, I think
relevant.
that's very good. And this is important in the sense that within an organization, you have different departments, you have different teams. Ultimately, each one has a role, but and then they need to create their own vision and mission. And that should then link in, as you've correctly said, with the overall vision and mission of the organization. And the team, or this particular team, whether it's the finance team, the marketing team, they need to figure out how they're going to contribute in achieving the overall vision and mission. How do they add value? And that's what keeps things moving, and that's what helps the organization eventually to succeed.
Brilliant. So I think we've come to the end of our time. I hope we don't get cut off anytime soon, but I just want to check in with you to see, do you have any final words or final thoughts around this particular subject?
So I have a couple of favorite quotes that I wanted to leave our audience with. Yep. And so firstly, I'll just give you a 30-second wrap up of what we've talked about and how I think a team leader should go about building an effective team. Firstly, share a vision. We've talked about that. Communicate. Make sure you have open communication with your team. Be the leader. In other words, set the example, mentor and coach your team members, and model the right behavior. That's what being a leader is about. And the final point, which is very important, is avoid micromanaging. So leaders don't really get into the weeds, so to speak. They as you've said also, let people go out and do the job and make mistakes. But then when they do make mistakes, treat that as a learning experience. So the two quotes I'm going to leave you with this week. Firstly, Zig Ziglar says, people often say motivation doesn't last. Well, that's why neither does bathing, and that's why we recommend it daily. So motivation doesn't last, but that doesn't mean we don't engage. That's a classic one, right? One of the best ones. And another one from Napoleon Hill, the guy who wrote that very famous book, Think and Grow Rich. The starting point of all achievement, he says, the starting point of all achievement is desire. And we talked about intrinsic motivation. It has to come from within. So, we can do everything else, but ultimately the motivation and the desire to succeed comes from within.
Beautiful.
These are my parting and final thoughts for the night.
I love that. I love that. So thank you very much, Amir. I just want one more question. You were talking about the Australian cricket team, and there was a documentary that you're watching. Is there any way that anyone can get a hold of it or watch it on Netflix?
It's available through Prime. It's available through Prime Video. So depending on which country, but I think it's something you can subscribe to online. It's not very expensive. Even if you just binge watched it, it will only cost you $5 or $10 for this. But it's definitely
what's the documentary called?
It's called The Test Match, I think.
Beautiful.
And it's about 8 episodes and all filmed behind the scenes. So you watch what's happening inside the changing rooms, the training, and you actually watch the manager or the coach of the team, go through all of the stuff that we've talked about. So it's actually wonderful learning for most people.
I mean, you're giving a sports example. I mean, if you haven't seen The Last Dance, the documentary on Michael Jordan, it really dives deep, not only him, but the team around him as well. I think that's something one must watch, and it is so powerful. I'm on the second turn of watching it over. But I was a basketball player once again, but it's incredible to watch if you haven't watched it. So Amir, thank you once again. I really appreciate your time, and I'm sure everybody who's watching this appreciates the valuable insights that you've shared with us today. And we look forward to another episode, and you'll find out what that topic is very, very soon, but we'll talk about that very, very soon. But thank you all for watching. And if you have any questions, any comments, do leave them in the comment section below, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. All the best.
Thank you
Thanks,
very
Amir.
much, Imad. See you again.
Take care.
Bye.